For today's demonstration, I will be demonstrating how to create a student admission at SIAS Learning Management System. But before we start, let me first give an overview of today's demonstration. With SIAS Learning Management System, our system offers student admission, through online admission and through traditional admission or manual admission. With the online admission, it allows the students to request an admission for the school, whereas the school will assess and evaluate the student's request, without having the student to be physically available during admission. Then for our manual admission. This type of admission is when the student will be required to be physically available at the day of admission. But it depends on the school which type of admission will be used. And for today, my goal is to demonstrate how to set up the online and manual admission. For my first demonstration, I will be demonstrating how to set up the online admission. In order for a user to set up the online admission, the user must first navigate through Transaction and select Admission menu. Upon selecting Admission menu, the system will present the secondary menu for the admission. Now for the online admission, we will first need to configure the admission requirements, admission schedule, and automatic ID number prefix. First, let us configure the admission requirements. Select Admission Requirements at the Admission menu. Upon selecting the admission requirement, the system will present its user interface. Now the user must fill up the admission requirement fields starting from student level up until requirement number. Please observe as I configure requirements for a certain student level with its corresponding course. For the student level, I will set the level to Senior High School, and enter CPJ or Computer Programming Java at the course field. And select a document that I will require the student to submit. Let's say I will require the student to submit a birth certificate. The user can select Search button to locate and select the document. But here with our system, we already created initial data for document type that a student will submit, but if ever the required document is not on the list, the user can create additional requirements. In order for a user to create additional requirements, the user must navigate through Files, General, and select Documents. Here at the Document User interface, the user can create a document. For example, I will add a new document. Let's say I want to add a good moral certificate. Click Add button to enable the disabled fields at the Document User interface, then enter the details of the document. After filling up the details, click Save button to save the record. But do take note, this is based on my own preference as an example. The user can always use his or her own way of inputting the details. Now let us return at the admission requirement. After the document, we will now set which type of students we will require the documents for. If it's solely for freshmen, or transferee, or for both category. But I will set it to both for my demonstration. Then the user is also given the choice if the document is optional or not. Check Must Upload Document to notify the student that the document must be uploaded, but if not, the user can disregard this option. And lastly, set the number. Since this is our first document, I will set the number to 1. After filling up the details, click Save button to save the record. With that, we have successfully created a requirement for the online admission. But I will create another document as a requirement. Please observe as I enter the details of the other requirement. Now that we have finished setting up the admission requirement, we will now set up the admission schedule. At the admission schedule user interface, I will set the student level to Senior High, and the course to CPJ. To match the details that we have entered at the admission requirement. Then I will set the period to first semester school year 2021-2022, as the active period for my demonstration, but do take note the user must always input the active period of the school. And also we must set the same period at the Tools menu. Navigate through Tools, and select Option menu. At the Option user interface, the user must match the period inputted at the admission schedule. After matching the period, click Save button. Now let us return at the admission schedule. After the period, we will now set the dates for the online admission. For my demonstration, I will set the start date to February 26, 2022, and the end date to February 28, 2022. Then the user is also given an option, if the schedule will require the student to take an admission examination or an admission interview, but if not applicable the user can disregard this option. But if applicable the user can select an option, and notify the student of the selected option, will be conducted online or not. And if the user has selected an examination or interview, the user must input a time for the selected option, while following the format example. And must also input the passing score for the selected option. Let's say the passing score for the interview is 86. Meaning on the day of the interview the student must score a minimum score of 86. Then the user must also input the number of slots per day. Let's say 50. Then since the school will conduct an interview, the user is also given an option to create a custom notification if the student passed or failed. But if not applicable the user can disregard this option. After filling up the admission schedule, click Save button to save the entered admission requirement. With that we have successfully created and configured an admission schedule for the course CPJ Senior High School. But if ever the user does not want a specified course for the schedule, the user can do so by leaving the course text box blank. If the course text box was left blank, the system will automatically assign the schedule for the whole senior high school students, or will assign the schedule to the whole students categorized by level, regardless of the student course. And lastly we will now set up the automatic ID prefix of the students that will be admitted. Here at the automatic ID prefix, it allows the system to automatically generate the ID of the students based on a custom prefix, with a specified entry period and level. Please observe as I set up the automatic ID prefix. At the start date text box the system will automatically retrieve the current date. Now the user must input the end date where the custom ID prefix will expire. Let's say after a year the ID prefix will expire, so I will input the date to February 26, 2023. But again this is based on my own preference as an example. Later the user can always set the datas based on the user's preference or based on the school's preference. Then we will set the level to senior high school to match the entries that we have entered a while ago, and for the period we will also need to match the period that we have used at the admission schedule. And at the last field of the user interface, the user must now enter the custom ID prefix. For my demonstration I will set the prefix to SHS21. After the user has finished filling up the fields, click Save button to save the record. With that we have successfully set up an online admission for the students to use. Now I will demonstrate the process on how the student will apply for an online admission, and how will the school will assess and evaluate the student application for admission. In order for a student to apply for an online admission, the student must navigate to the school's SIAS learning management system and select Admission button at the lower part of the login interface. Upon clicking Admission button the system will present the user interface for the application for online admission. Now the student must first check the New Application checkbox. Upon checking the New Application checkbox the student must take note of the control number, for the control number will be used to check the status of the student's online admission. After checking the New Application checkbox, the student must now enter his or her details. Please observe as I input the student details. But do take note, only enter the details that are applicable to the student, and if ever the student has skipped a required field the system will mark the required text field red. Here at the required documents, do take notice that the system presented the documents that we have entered a while ago at the admission requirements. At the required documents, the student must locate and upload the soft copy of the document that the system is requiring. Please observe as I upload the documents. And also the system presented the date for the schedule that we have entered a while ago at the admission schedule. Since the schedule that we have created required an interview, the student will now select a date for the interview within the dates presented below. After the student has finished filling up the admission application details, check the confirmation checkbox if the entered data is correct, and upon checking the confirmation checkbox, the system will lock the entered details. And lastly, click Save button to save the application. Upon clicking Save button, the system will notify the user for a confirmation. Select Yes to submit the application. With that, the student has successfully submitted an application for admission. Now we will shift to the side of the school to demonstrate how the school will view the application of the student. At the side of the school, in order for a user to view the student applications for admission, the user must navigate through Transaction, Admission, and select Application for Admission menu. Upon clicking the application for admission, the system will present its user interface. Now at the user interface, the user must filter the viewing of application. It can be daily, monthly, yearly and others. But for my demonstration, I will filter the application to daily. Upon filtering the application, the system will present the list of student applications on a daily basis. Now in order for a user to assess the student, the user can view the documents that the student has uploaded by clicking the Preview Docs button. And the user can also view the control number of the student, and can also reschedule the date of interview. But let's say for this admission, upon assessing the student application, the user gave passing marks. In order for a user to give passing marks, the user must first check the student application, and select Approved at the mark option at the upper right corner of the user interface. And lastly, click Save button. Upon clicking Save button, the system will automatically move the student data to the approved list. After the approval of admission, at the student's side, the student must recheck the status of the application by re-entering the control number at the application for admission text box. Do take notice that the system notify the student by stating the date and time of the interview. Now let's say, suppose the interview was finished, and now the school would want to create the result of the interview. In order for the school to create the result, the user must navigate through Transaction, Admission, and select Admission Result. Upon selecting Admission Result, the system will present its user interface. The user must filter the admission result. It can be daily, monthly, yearly and others. But I will filter the result to daily. Upon filtering the result, the system will present the list of student. Now I will give a score to the student based on the interview. Let's say the student got 90. Do take notice as I input 90 as the score. The system automatically stated that the student passed, since we have set the passing score at the admission schedule a while ago to 86. Now let us return to the student side. At the student side, enter the control number at the application text box. Do take notice the system notified the student that he or she passed the interview. And at the same time the system gave the student credentials to the system. Whereas the student can use the given credentials to access the system, to make an online enrollment, access the learning management, request or drop subject, evaluate his or her own curriculum and others. But for a more elaborative demonstration on the student side, I will upload a separate video for the student account. With that, our demonstration for the online admission is done. Now let us proceed with the manual admission of students. For the manual admission of students. In order for a user to create a student admission manually, the user must first set up the automatic ID prefix at the admission menu. But a while ago I have already demonstrated the setting up of the ID prefix. Since it was already set up, I will no longer set the prefix again, to avoid data double entry. The same is for the setting up of the period at the option menu. Now to create a student admission, the user must navigate through Transaction, Admission, and select Create Student Account. Upon selecting Create Student Account, the system will present its user interface. Now please observe as I enter the details of the student. At the campus text box I will set it to main for my demonstration, but the user must always use the school's own campus code. And set the course to CPJ or Computer Programming Java. Upon selecting a course, the system will automatically assign a curriculum based on the student entry period. Now the user must select Create Account button to create the student admission. Upon selecting Create Account, the system will present the ID of the student and the student name. With that, we have successfully admitted a student manually. But do take note, the student details is not complete. And in order for a user to complete the student details, the user must navigate through Transaction, Admission, and select Student Profile. Upon selecting Student Profile, the system will present its user interface. Now let me input the student ID that the system generated a while ago. Here at the student profile, the user can manually input the student details, from enrollment data, up until employment records, but do take note, only input the details that are applicable to the student data. Please observe as I present the content of the student profile. Again I repeat, the user can use the student profile to manually input the student data. And click Save button, if the user has entered a student data. With that, our demonstration for today is finished. Thanks for listening and have a nice day.